Hey there, welcome back. Great to see you again for law number 6, refine your weakness. If you haven't watched the previous episodes yet, you're missing some important steps in this journey. Just check the description for the links and give them a watch so you can keep building on your growth one law at a time. All right, let's dive in. Law number 6, refine your weakness. Turn your biggest flaws into your most surprising strengths. Every person you admire has something in common. At some point in their life, they were defined by a flaw. Not just a small imperfection, but something others saw as a reason they could never succeed. Some carried physical limitations. Others lacked resources, education, or connections. Some had tempers, speech impediments, or social awkwardness. What separates those who rise from those who remain trapped is not the absence of these flaws, but the ability to turn them into leverage. A weakness unexamined is a wound. A weakness refined is a weapon. The average person treats weakness as a permanent scar. They hide it, hoping no one notices. They build excuses around it. That's just the way I am, and avoid situations where it might be exposed. But this avoidance creates a paradox. The flaw begins to control them. Like a boxer protecting an old injury, they telegraph their movements, limit their options, and become predictable. The very act of hiding the weakness makes it more visible to those who know where to look. Now imagine the opposite approach. Instead of hiding your weakness, you bring it into the open, not as confession, but as design. You study it, you learn its patterns. You train in ways that compensate for it until the very skill you lacked becomes the skill that defines you. This is what Richard Branson did with dyslexia. Instead of forcing himself into the rigid academic mold that punished him for his difference, he built businesses around the principle of radical clarity. His weakness taught him that the simpler the message, the faster it spreads. That single insight shaped the Virgin brand into one of the most recognizable in the world. Or take the case of Demosthenes, the great Athenian orator. As a young man, his voice was weak, his speech unclear, and his presence forgettable. Fatal flaws in a society where political power came through public speaking. But he refused to accept this as fate. He trained with pebbles in his mouth to strengthen his diction, shouted into the wind to develop projection, and practiced speeches while running uphill to build endurance. The man who began as an object of ridicule became one of the most influential voices in ancient Greece. His weakness, refined, became his legacy. The military world offers even starker examples. Hannibal's victory at Cannae is legendary, but the principle runs deeper. Armies throughout history have baited opponents by exposing a calculated weakness. The key here is control. The weakness is never uncontrolled chaos. It is a deliberate signal designed to shape the enemy's behavior. In chess, this is known as a poisoned pawn, an apparent gift that, once taken, leads to disaster. In life, showing a controlled weakness can lead rivals to underestimate you, misallocate their resources, or reveal their own vulnerabilities. Here's the strategic truth. Weaknesses are only dangerous when they are unmanaged. Once you understand and own them, they can no longer be used against you, and in many cases, they can be inverted to become your greatest strengths. Think of your weakness as raw ore. In its natural state, it's unremarkable and perhaps even burdensome. But through the process of refinement, pressure, heat, shaping, that ore becomes steel. Steel that can be used to build, to protect, or to cut. This transformation doesn't just change the material, it changes the perception. People will no longer see the flaw, they will see the weapon. And this transformation has a secondary benefit. It changes how you see the weaknesses of others. Once you've been through the refining process yourself, you gain a hunter's eye for unrefined flaws in those around you. You'll notice the rival who can't control their temper, the competitor who always overplays their hand when praised, the leader who panics under uncertainty. Every weakness in an opponent is a potential opening, not to be mocked, but to be used. Hannibal didn't beat Rome by being stronger. He beat them by exploiting the arrogance they didn't know how to hide. This law is about dual mastery. First, refining your own weakness so it becomes untouchable, and second, turning the weaknesses of others into points of leverage. You will learn to see flaws not as limitations but as opportunities for yourself and against your rivals. In the pages ahead, we'll dive into the psychology of why weaknesses hold such power over us, how to systematically dismantle their grip, and how to turn them into tools that shape perception and strategy. We'll also study the art of spotting and exploiting the unrefined weaknesses of others, because in the long game of influence, it is not just your strengths that win battles, but the blind spots of those who face you. This is not about pretending you have no flaws. It is about ensuring that no flaw you have remains in the hands of your enemy. The psychology of weakness holds power over you because of how the human mind is wired. At the most primitive level, our brains are built for survival in a social tribe. For most of human history, being accepted by the group meant protection, food, and security. Being exposed as less capable in any way could mean rejection, and in the prehistoric world, rejection often meant death. That ancient survival instinct still runs in modern minds. Even today, when no saber-toothed predator is waiting outside your door, you feel an almost physical anxiety when your flaw is exposed. It might be a poor memory, an accent, a lack of formal education, or an awkwardness in social situations. The trigger doesn't matter. The emotional response is the same. Hide it before someone sees it. This instinct to conceal is the very thing that makes a weakness dangerous. What is hidden can be used against you because you have no control over when it is revealed. Skilled negotiators, interrogators, and competitors understand this. They probe for discomfort. They ask seemingly harmless questions. They watch body language, note the hesitation, and then press harder. Once they find the unrefined flaw, they don't need to overpower you. They just need to steer you into the moment when that weakness shows itself. Psychologists call this compensatory adaptation, the human tendency to develop skills or strategies to offset limitations. In its purest form, it's a survival advantage. When one ability is restricted, the brain reroutes resources to strengthen others. The blind develop heightened hearing. The socially anxious often become exceptional listeners. The underfunded entrepreneur becomes an expert in creative resource allocation. But compensatory adaptation only happens when the person confronts the flaw directly. Denial prevents adaptation because you can't compensate for something you refuse to acknowledge. There's also a social psychological effect at play, the spotlight effect. We tend to believe our flaws are far more visible than they actually are. That belief makes us hyper-aware, overcompensating in unnatural ways, which ironically draws more attention to the very thing we are trying to hide. A public speaker who fears their hands shaking may clench them tightly, making the tension visible. A negotiator afraid of being perceived as inexperienced may speak too fast, betraying nervousness. In trying to hide the weakness, they telegraph it. Here is the paradox. The moment you openly acknowledge a weakness, it begins to lose its grip on you. In politics, in business, in personal relationships, there is immense disarming power in owning your flaws before anyone else can weaponize them. By putting them on the table and then demonstrating mastery over them, you deny others the chance to use them as leverage. From a strategic standpoint, understanding weakness is not just self-defense, it is intelligence gathering. If you have studied your own flaws, you will naturally become sharper at spotting unrefined flaws in others. You will notice when someone overreacts to a small criticism, revealing insecurity. You will recognize when a competitor avoids certain scenarios, signaling inexperience. These patterns are everywhere, but most people are too focused on hiding their own cracks to see them in others. The truth is, weakness is not static. It is either growing stronger through neglect or being diminished through refinement. There is no neutral ground. Every time you ignore it, you let it train against you. Every time you work on it, you turn the battlefield in your favor. If you accept this reality, you begin to see weakness differently. It is no longer a shame to be concealed, but raw material to be reshaped. And once you reshape it, you'll notice something profound. The people who once tried to use it against you will stop trying because it no longer works when you learn to turn weakness into strength. There is a moment in every great transformation when the flaw stops being a wound and becomes a weapon. But this transformation is not magic, it is a method. Weakness becomes strength when you stop denying it, stop resenting it, and begin studying it like an engineer studies the materials of a bridge. Refining your weakness, the internal transformation, is the first stage, is ownership. Until you say, yes, this is mine, you cannot begin to control it. You may have a temper, a lack of resources, poor public speaking skills, a short attention span, or a history of failure. Own it, not with self-pity, not with pride, but with precision. Write it down exactly as it is. Name the situations where it appears. Understand what triggers it. If your temper rises under pressure, note the exact patterns, the words, gestures, or environments that spark it. If you avoid public speaking, track how your body reacts. Is it your voice that shakes first, or your breathing? Weakness is not defeated by bravado, but by analysis. Once you understand it, you can begin the refining process. The refining process is not always about eliminating the weakness. Often, it's about using it differently. The shy person who cannot dominate a room through loud charisma can instead dominate through listening. In negotiation, this becomes a lethal advantage. While the extroverted talker gives away information in a flood of words, the quiet listener collects data, waits for the critical moment, and speaks with precision. People leave the table thinking the listener barely said a word, yet the listener walks away with the better deal. History loves the myth of the underdog who overcame their weakness, but the truth is often more subtle. They didn't overcome it, they learned to work with it. Take Frida Kahlo. A bus accident left her in chronic pain for life, forcing her to spend long periods confined to bed. For many, this would have been the end of any artistic ambition. For Kahlo, it became the beginning. Unable to travel or live freely, she turned her own body and suffering into the subject of her paintings. Her limitation gave her work an intensity and intimacy that made her one of the most distinctive artists of the 20th century. Using another's weakness, the external exploitation. Once you understand your weaknesses, you begin to see patterns in others. Just as a swordsman recognizes openings in an opponent's stance, you will see gaps in behavior. The impatient executive who interrupts in meetings. The romantic partner who cannot stand silence. The rival company that panics when their brand image is questioned. Every weakness is a door. Your task is to find the right key. The art here is subtle. You never point to the weakness directly, you lead the other person into a scenario where their flaw works against them. In military history, this is called shaping the battlefield. In Hannibal's campaign against Rome, he knew the Romans could not resist an apparent advantage. At Cannae, he deliberately weakened his center, letting the Romans charge in. Their arrogance, their belief that they were winning, pulled them deeper into the trap, until Hannibal's forces closed in from all sides. He didn't just exploit their weakness, he made them volunteer to use it against themselves. In love, the same principle plays out, sometimes tragically. A person deeply insecure about being abandoned might cling tighter in relationships. A manipulative partner can exploit this by withdrawing affection strategically, knowing the other will overcompensate. While this is a dark example, it shows the raw truth. In human dynamics, the person who understands the other's flaw first sets the tempo. In sports, Muhammad Ali famously used rope-a-dope against George Foreman in the 1974 Rumble in the Jungle. Ali knew Foreman's weakness was his overcommitment to offense. He threw powerful punches but drained his energy quickly. Ali leaned back on the ropes, let Foreman punch himself out, and when Foreman was exhausted, Ali attacked. Ali didn't need to be stronger, he needed to be smarter. Blending both sides, the dual advantage. The ultimate power comes when you do both at once. Refine your weakness and exploit the others. This creates a dynamic where your opponent cannot attack you effectively, but you can attack them at will. It's like playing chess while holding two queens, one from your side, one stolen from theirs. This is why mastering your weakness first is critical. If you haven't done that, you will be too busy defending yourself to notice the openings in your opponent's game. Once you've refined it, you move differently. You no longer flinch when the flaw is mentioned. You no longer overcompensate. And in that stillness, you see where the other person is exposed. The perception game, using weakness as camouflage. Here's where the strategy turns elegant. Sometimes you don't hide your weakness, you display it strategically. You let others believe it's still unrefined, so they underestimate you. This was one of the oldest tricks in Sun Tzu's Art of War. Appear weak when you are strong. When your opponent assumes you will break under pressure, they plan poorly, they extend too far, they underestimate your endurance, and when the decisive moment comes, they are already off balance. In business negotiations, a CEO might appear uncertain about technical details, allowing the other side to feel superior and lower their guard. In reality, the CEO is simply collecting more information before striking with a decisive proposal. Why this works in every field of life. Weakness is universal. It appears in politics, where opponents attack each other's vulnerabilities in debates. It appears in war, where armies seek the weak point in a defensive line. It appears in love, where people hide their insecurities while seeking partners who won't exploit them. It appears in sport, where coaches study hours of footage to find a single flaw in an opponent's movement. And yet, the same process applies to all. Acknowledge, study, refine, deploy. Whether you are a general, an artist, a boxer, a lover, or a CEO, the principles are identical. Your greatest advantage will not always be your raw strengths. Those are visible to everyone. Your true advantage will come from what others think is your weakness, because that is where they will never see the attack coming. There is a point in every transformation where a flaw stops being a wound and becomes a weapon. This shift doesn't happen through luck or by waiting for life to somehow fix you. It happens through deliberate refinement. A weakness becomes strength when you stop denying it, stop resenting it, and begin studying it with the same focus an architect uses when examining the foundation of a building. You may have a quick temper, a lack of resources, poor public speaking skills, or a restless mind. The first act is to own it completely, not with self-pity or false pride, but with precision. Identify exactly when it appears, what triggers it, and how others perceive it. The act of looking at your weakness without flinching is already the first step in reclaiming power over it. Once you understand it, you can begin to shape it. Sometimes shaping it means compensating for it. Other times it means using it differently. The naturally shy person, for example, will rarely dominate a room with sheer charisma, but they can dominate it through listening. And in negotiation, the quiet listener is often deadlier than the loud talker. While others flood the air with words, revealing more than they intend, the listener collects data, chooses their moment, and speaks with precision. History is full of those who turned limitations into defining strengths. Frida Kahlo's bus accident left her in chronic pain, tethered to her bed for months at a time. Many would have seen this as a creative death sentence. She turned it into her signature, painting the depths of her own suffering and creating works of intimacy and intensity that no physically free artist could have matched. Demosthenes, mocked in Athens for his weak voice and awkward speech, trained with pebbles in his mouth, practiced speeches against the roar of the sea, and ran uphill to strengthen his lungs. The man who began as an object of ridicule became one of the most respected orators in history. Hannibal, outnumbered and undersupplied, baited the Romans at Cannae by making his center deliberately appear weak. The Romans, arrogant and overconfident, surged forward, believing they had found the breaking point. Instead, they found themselves surrounded and destroyed. What unites all these stories is a principle. Once you refine your own weakness, you can no longer be attacked through it. And more than that, you can begin to see and exploit weaknesses in others. This is where the strategy turns from defense to offense. Once you have lived through the process of refinement yourself, you develop a hunter's vision for flaws in your rivals. You'll notice the impatient executive who interrupts too often, the politician who reacts badly to criticism, the boxer who always drops his guard after a left hook, the lover who cannot stand silence. Every weakness is a door. The art is not to point at it, but to create the conditions where the other person walks through it willingly. Hannibal did not tell the Romans they were arrogant. He simply built a battlefield where their arrogance destroyed them. Muhammad Ali did not tell George Foreman that he exhausted himself with overcommitment. He leaned on the ropes, let Foreman punch until the fire went out of him, and struck when the man was too tired to defend himself. The ultimate level of mastery is to do both at the same time. Refine your weakness while exploiting the weakness of others. This creates a dynamic where you are no longer vulnerable, but your opponent is. You can move freely while they constantly adjust to protect themselves. And if you are bold enough, you can even display your weakness intentionally, letting them underestimate you. Sun Tzu's advice to appear weak when you are strong has been misused by amateurs who think it means pretending to fail. In truth, it means showing a flaw that is already under your control, using it as bait. The business leader who plays the role of the non-technical visionary may be underestimated by engineers at the negotiating table, right up until the moment they deliver a fully formed, technically sound proposal that catches everyone off guard. Weakness is universal, appearing in war, politics, business, love, and sport. The process for mastering it never changes. Acknowledge it, study it, refine it, and use it. Most people try to avoid their flaws forever, hoping the world will not notice. But those who master them gain something more than strength. They gain unpredictability. And in the long game of influence, unpredictability is a form of power that no one can counter. Your strengths are obvious and will be guarded against. Your refined weaknesses, on the other hand, are invisible weapons waiting for the moment when everyone least expects them. When you refine a weakness, you do more than strengthen a skill. You alter the very fabric of who you are. It is not just about what you can do. It is about how you see yourself and how others are forced to see you. In the beginning, a weakness feels like an anchor, holding you to a certain identity. I'm not a leader. I'm bad with numbers. I can't handle pressure. These are not just statements. They are self-imposed boundaries. The moment you decide to work on a weakness, you begin to erode those boundaries. The process is slow, often uncomfortable, but every hour spent in deliberate refinement chips away at the old identity and lays bricks for a new one. Over time, you stop seeing yourself as the person who can't and start seeing yourself as the person who overcame. That transformation is visible to others, and visibility changes dynamics. People respond differently to someone who has mastered what was once their flaw, because it signals adaptability, resilience, and an unwillingness to be defined by limitations. This process is fueled by your past. The person you are today is a direct result of the choices, mistakes, and adaptations you've made before. Every hardship you have endured, every failure you have absorbed, every situation where you felt exposed has left a set of lessons behind. Most people try to forget these moments, but the truth is they are the raw material of refinement. You cannot create strength out of nothing. You forge it from the very moments you thought would break you. A person who has always succeeded without strain may appear powerful, but they are brittle because they have never learned to bend. It is often the one who was underestimated, rejected, or humiliated who develops the deepest reserves of strength, because they have been forced to survive without the luxury of perfect conditions. Once you have gone through this transformation yourself, spotting the unrefined weaknesses of others becomes second nature. You can see when a confident man's voice tightens on a certain subject, when a skilled fighter's breathing changes after a particular combination, when a seasoned negotiator's composure slips in the face of personal criticism. You no longer just hear words, you hear the gaps between them. You no longer just see actions, you see the hesitation before they occur. And in that space between what people show and what they fear, you find openings. There is also a deeper layer to this, one that has been acknowledged across cultures and philosophies. Great teachers have long understood that growth comes through the very obstacles that seem to block it. The Buddha's teachings on the middle path arose from his years of both indulgence and extreme deprivation, experiences that taught him neither comfort nor suffering alone leads to wisdom, but the balance forged between them. Jesus' message of strength through humility was not born from a life of dominance, but from enduring betrayal, rejection, and pain while refusing to abandon his principles. Myths from Greece to India speak of gods and heroes who were shaped as much by their weaknesses as by their powers. The unsteady step of Achilles, the exile of Rama, the trials of Hercules. The consistent lesson is that true strength is not the absence of weakness, but mastery over it. Understanding this opens the door to another dimension, the psychological warfare of selective weakness. Sometimes the most unsettling thing you can do to an opponent is to withhold the full extent of your power. A rival who cannot clearly see your limits cannot plan for them. When you hide your strengths but allow a controlled weakness to show, you create a false sense of security. They relax, overextend, and prepare for the wrong kind of fight. This is why the most dangerous players rarely show their full hand early. They are willing to appear ordinary until the decisive moment, when the mask drops and the reality is revealed too late. This principle operates not just in individuals, but in entire civilizations. History is filled with nations that began with apparent disadvantages, poor land, limited resources, hostile neighbors, and turned them into strengths. Ancient Athens lacked the vast agricultural wealth of Sparta, but its rocky terrain and limited farmland forced it to become a naval power and a hub of trade. Japan, isolated and resource-poor, developed a culture of precision, efficiency, and innovation that made it a global industrial force. In each case, the weakness created an environment that bred adaptability and strength. Civilizations, like people, grow not from what they are given easily, but from what they must wrestle into shape. This is why refining weakness is not just a tactic, it is a long game. The reserves you build through this process will always be more valuable in the future than in the present. Strengths can fade through overuse or neglect, but the skill of turning a disadvantage into an advantage is self-renewing. Every new challenge you face will present fresh flaws, and each time you will already know the process for transformation. You will meet the next weakness without fear, because you have mastered the art of reshaping it before. The great secret is that in the long run, this ability is rarer and more valuable than natural talent. Talent is inherited, resilience is built. And in a world that is constantly changing, the one who can adapt faster than their rivals will always hold the advantage. Weakness, then, is not an obstacle to be feared, but a resource to be mined, a resource that, once refined, cannot be taken from you. By now, the principle should be clear. Weakness is never fixed by hiding from it, and strength is never secure if it is not tested. But knowing this is not enough. The real power lies in how you move with this understanding in the real world. The moment you decide to refine a weakness, you must treat it as both a training ground and a trap for yourself and a trap for others. Every challenge that exposes it is not an attack to fear, but an opportunity to sharpen it further. If public speaking is your flaw, you do not avoid the stage. You take it in small doses until your voice no longer betrays you. If patience is your shortfall, you deliberately place yourself in situations where waiting is inevitable, training your mind to see time as an ally rather than an enemy. Once you have refined a weakness, you should not rush to display your new strength. Let others believe the old flaw still exists. The longer they underestimate you, the more room you have to maneuver. In negotiation, in politics, in personal dynamics, the person who is misjudged holds the advantage. Show your cards only when the move is irreversible, when the advantage will not fade once revealed. If you move too early, you give your rivals time to adapt. If you move at the moment of their deepest confidence, you strike a blow they cannot recover from. Equally important is the discipline of watching others. People are endlessly revealing their unrefined weaknesses, in casual conversation, in moments of stress, and in the patterns of their decisions. The skilled observer does not pounce at the first sign. They wait, learning the exact conditions that make the weakness appear. Then, when the stakes are high and the other person is least able to hide it, they create those conditions deliberately. It is in this timing that strategy becomes art. Never underestimate the value of selective weakness in psychological warfare. The feigned vulnerability, the apparent gap in skill, the controlled mistake, all of these can pull your rival into a fight they think they can win. This is the rope that draws them closer, the false opening that makes them commit more than they intended. Used well, it is as powerful as any show of force. But use it without control and it will backfire, because unlike a real weakness, a false one requires absolute mastery to maintain without slipping into truth. Finally, understand that the game is endless. You will never reach a point where you have no weaknesses, only a point where you are so practiced at refining them that they lose their power to damage you. The process will become instinctive. You will meet new flaws with curiosity instead of fear, and you will watch your rivals cling to theirs with the same desperation you once knew. In that moment, you will realize why those who master this law are so rare. It demands the humility to admit what you lack, the discipline to transform it, the patience to conceal it, and the clarity to exploit it when the time comes. The world rewards the strong, but it is shaped by those who can turn the fragile into the formidable. Your weaknesses are not the end of your story. They are the raw beginnings of the strength that will define you. And if you learn to wield them as weapons, you will not just survive the game, you will rewrite it. Remember, always make eye contact. It will make you a predator. All right, that's a wrap for part 6. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate your time and energy. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps the content coming your way. And be sure to check out part 3, where we dive into law number 7, listen for what's unsaid. And as usual, it's going to be a powerful one, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Until then, take care and keep growing. See you in the next one.